بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اهتدى بهداه. أما بعد. Last week we covered or a couple of days ago we covered and started to begin with the chapter of wudu of the book of BULUGH al MARAM by Hadith Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani alayhi rahmatullah. And he was from the ulama of which science? He was a muhaddith from the scholars of hadith, from the major scholars of hadith in his time, rahimahullah. Al-Hafidh, the title Al-Hafidh, it's not as we know it now, somebody who memorizes the Quran, or somebody who is a person of knowledge. Al-Hafidh with them was somebody who had memorized 100,000 ahadith. And when they say ahadith, they mean with its chains of narration. That's the Hafidh with them. In our time, we're a bit lenient with Hafidh. Everyone's a Hafidh. Hafidh this person, Hafidh that person, which is not the case. It's lenient. Even other titles like Al-Allama and Al-Alim and so on, we do have to be careful with it. Otherwise, what happens if everyone is just given these titles, then people don't distinguish anymore who's a scholar, who's not a scholar, who's a student of knowledge and who's a scholar, who's the mufti, the qadi, and who's just a person who has some understanding of the sharia or teaches sharia and so on. So these titles are important to understand in order for us to be able to distinguish. Otherwise, what happens is what we see now. Everyone being asked. Someone who has no relationship with knowledge or with fiqh or with hadith is asked. And a person relies on their rulings without asking for a reference, without asking for anything. A person prefers the opinion of their local imam to the mufti or some of the scholars of some of the Muslim lands and Muslim countries, or some of the scholars who have been accepted by the ummah as being imams. So it's important for us to distinguish between. That doesn't mean we can't benefit from other people. That doesn't mean anyone who's not an alim has to remain silent, especially in a country like Britain, where people like students of knowledge are sort of required to give reminders and speak and help out. Otherwise there'll be no benefit. However, it's important to distinguish who is who exactly. A scholar, you can take their opinion from them and Assalamu alaikum, act upon it, that's your religion for you. Whereas somebody like a student of knowledge, it's not the case. You need to ask for a reference. Okay, we covered the hadith number 29, hadith of wudu, hadith of the siwak. لولا أن أشق على أمتي لأمرتهم بالسواك مع كل وضوء. Had I not wanted to overburden my ummah, I would have commanded them with the siwak for every wudu. And in narration, every salah. And we said this shows that the siwak is a sunnah. And when is it used? When exactly? With wudu, but when? With madmada. We said with madmada, because that's the point of the siwak. Left hand or right hand?
Right hand.
The majority say left hand. Why do they say left hand? In fact, the Sheikh Taqiyuddin ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah says, I don't know any scholar who said use the right hand. Even though his granddad says use the right hand. Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah, who's from the big imams of the Hanabila, he says he prefers using the right hand. However, maybe Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah means, from those who are before, he doesn't know one uses the left hand. Anyway, we said the principle was left hand is used for removing impurities and that kind of thing. So most scholars say using the siwak is like removing an impurity. Yeah, the siwak, this toothbrush. What's it called? Herbal toothbrush. What did I say? Hey, anyways, this herbal sort of toothbrush / stick is there to remove impurities. So this is why the majority of fuqaha say the left hand is to be used. And Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah and other scholars say use the right hand. And the matter is open, alhamdulillah. The hadith of Uthman, which is a long hadith explaining the exact description of wudu, we covered also. And the hadith of Ali radiallahu anhu, with its different narrations, which we said wiping the head is done once or 3 times?
Once.
Once. Why did we say 3 times? 2 reasons.
It's supposed to be a wipe, not a wash.
The first is that it's a wipe, not a wash. If you wet your hands, you wipe. Then wet your hands and wipe again. Then wet your hands and wipe again. You've turned it into a wash. It's like washing your feet or washing your face. And this is supposed to be a wipe only. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. Wipe the heads. And the second reason, it's a more even stronger reason. Huh? That explains this, that it has to be wiped. But why going to clean the socks? Once, not 3 times. Maybe because the other arms of the parts of the body are 3 times also. Because it was not narrated from the Prophet ﷺ. That's why. Because all of the ahadith speak of him wiping the head once. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Okay. We said wiping the ears, we said it's part of the head, and therefore it can be wiped. You can wipe the head and also the ears with it straight away. Which finger do we say goes into the ear? The index finger, and the thumbs wipe the outside of the ear. And we said it's better to renew the water. You renew the wetting of hands. So you wet the hands, you wipe the head, then you wet the hands again, and then wipe the ear. And that's recommended. Today's hadith عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا استيقظ أحدكم من منامه فليستنثر 3 فإن الشيطان يبيت على خيشومه. If one of you wakes up from his sleep, he must clean his nose 3 times, for the shaitan spends the night in one's nostrils. And we said the principle here with these kinds of ahadith, as is the principle with the Imams of the Salaf, rahmatullahi alayhim, أَمِرْ رُوحَ كَمَا جَاءَتْ بِلَا كَيْفٍ. Pass them on as they come without a how. Pass them on as they come without a how. What does that mean? This is referring to the second part of the hadith. Matters of the unseen, the how is not to be questioned. Matters of the unseen, matters of ghaib, matters of Jannah and Nar, punishment of the grave, and jinn, and angels, and attributes of Allah, and so on. The how is not to be questioned. Why? How can we understand the Quran then, if we're not going to question the how? How are we going to understand these kinds of hadith? If we're not going to question the how, why do we then have this hadith? Why do we have other hadith and verses? It's an important to distinguish between questioning the how, which is to be left, and questioning the whole thing itself, the whole narration itself. For example, punishment of the grave. There's a difference between someone who says, no, this is a matter of the unseen, therefore forget it, leave it alone, ignore it. Which is right or wrong? Wrong. And between someone who says, no, punishment of the grave is there, but the reality of it we don't question. Is that clear? How it occurs we don't question. 2 people are in the same grave. One is from the people of Jannah, one is from the people of Nar. Both in the same hole. Either due to a lack of space or whatever other reason. One is being punished, one is being rewarded. Is that possible? They're in the same hole.
Yes.
Maybe touching each other. How does it work? This is a matter of the unseen. So a person doesn't say, oh, this is a matter of the unseen, therefore ignore it, don't worry about it. No, worry about it. Otherwise, what's the point in the Prophet ﷺ saying it? And what's the point in it being mentioned in the Quran? But what's ignored is the how. What's ignored is the how. And the same applies to attributes of Allah. Attributes of Allah that are mentioned in the Quran or by the Prophet ﷺ, pass them on as they come. You mention it as it's in the hadith, or you mention it as is in the verse without questioning the how. Such as things such as Allah descending in the lowest heaven, to the lowest heaven in the night, such as Allah's speech, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا, Allah spoke to Musa, how? That's from the attributes of Allah. So a person says, Allahu A'lam. Pass them on as they come. Pass on the verses as they come. And one of the Imams of Qira'ah had a Mu'tazili come to him and say, وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ مُوسَى تَكْلِيمًا. A Mu'tazili or someone else. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ instead of وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ, which changes the meaning. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهُ means Allah spoke to Musa. وَكَلَّمَ اللَّهَ means Musa spoke to Allah. So he flipped the verse, or added the Fettah instead of the Dhamma, in order to change the meaning and say Allah does not speak. How can you say about Allah that He speaks, and so on. So this Imam of Hadith said to him, in that case, what do you say about the verse وَكَلَّمَهُ رَبُّهُ? Another verse which says, and Allah spoke to him. There's no way you can interpret this in any way. Whether you add to it or subtract to it, the meaning is the same. This problem only occurs if a person tries to delve too much into how does this work, how is it impossible, because your nature as humans is not the same as an angel, let alone the creator of the heavens and the earth and the angels. And one of the people was talking a lot about the attributes of Allah and how and this and that. So one of the Salaf said to him, look, let us first try and understand the creation of Allah. Once we've understood it, we'll move on to Allah. He said to him, the Prophet ﷺ saw Jibreel alayhi salam, and he had how many wings? 600 wings. He said, try to imagine 600 wings. How do they apply? Where do they go? How does he fly? 300 here, 300 there, 200 in front. How? Try and imagine. And he said, okay, I won't speak about this again. And this is Jibreel alayhi salam, a creation from Allah. Small part compared to what Allah's created. So, for this is an important principle. Otherwise a person will end up being confused. So this is why the scholars say this is to be kept as it is. The shaitan remaining in somebody's nose. Other scholars say the meaning of this is that it brings about sort of a slackness and a tiredness and a laziness. So when a person blows their nose there, they sort of wake up and become more energetic and so on. And that's a valid understanding of it. But generally speaking, these kinds of hadith are to be kept as they are without a kayf. Unless the imams of tafsir or the imams of hadith have understood it in a certain way, in which case that's different. وَعَنْهُ meaning what? And from him, i.e. Abu Hurairah. The author doesn't always mention the narrator of the hadith. Sometimes he'll say, and from him, which means the one before him, rather than repeating his name. It says, and him also. إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فلا يغمس يده في الإناء حتى يغسلها ثلاثا فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده. When one of you wakes up from his sleep, he must not put his hands in a utensil until he has washed it 3 times. Because one does not know where his hand was while he slept. This means if there's a utensil of water that a person wants to use to make wudu, the first thing that they do is what? Not stick your hand into it and wash automatically. Rather, you wash the hands 3 times, either by using a cup or by using something else to take out the water. Then wash the hands 3 times. Then after that, you can begin. Some of them might say, because the hands are impure. Is that the case? Always? That after you wake up, every time your hand is impure? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. In fact, the most of the time, the hand won't be impure. Even if you were to touch your private parts, would that make the hand impure? No. The hand is still pure. And so this is an action which is ta'abbudi, pure act of worship. Pure act of worship, without necessarily needing to look at why exactly. Just like wiping the head is pure act of worship. It doesn't wash the hair, doesn't clean the hair. It's just an act of worship. Similarly, this is an act of worship. Ahmad ibn Hanbal says this applies only when you sleep at night. Why? He says because the Prophet says, فَإِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَا يُدْرِينَ بَاتَتْ يَدُهُ. And the word batat only applies to the night. And other scholars say no, it's a general, any kind of sleep. And whether you're going to put your hands into the utensils or not, Either way, it's good to wash the hands 3 times from waking up anyway. This is mustahab according to the Jumhur, before putting it into a utensil. وعن لقيط بن صابرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أسبغ الوضوء وخلل بين الأصابع وبالغ في الاستنشاق إلا أن تكون صائما. He says صلى الله عليه وسلم, perform perfect wudu. Perform perfect wudu, which means a person is to pay attention to their wudu, not just a quick wipe, wash and so on, to quickly get it over and done with, to be paid attention to, making sure that every part of the body is washed properly with reason, within reason. Not that a person spends an hour making wudu and says, I'm implementing this hadith. You're not implementing any hadith. You're not implementing any hadith. No hadith encourages the spending of an hour in wudu, or spending ages and ages in making wudu, just to be sure. This has gone beyond being sure. It's gone beyond being sure. And in fact, the scholars say this is accepting the waswas of the shaitan, which is in itself haram. In itself, accepting the waswas of the shaitan is forbidden. Being fooled and accepting the waswas is in itself forbidden. And this is why the scholars dislike, and some of them even prohibit, that you add to washing a part of the body 3 times. That you add to washing the body 3 times. You wash the arm once, and twice, and 3, and 4, and 8, and 30, and 40, just to be sure. You jump in a river and give yourself rest and give us rest. For this is a complete opposite. For when we say asbigh al-wudu, make perfect wudu, all that is required, the part of the body that requires to be washed, has to have been touched with water. That is it. Just the once, and it suffices. And if you add 2 times and 3 times, that's better, recommended, but not wajib. And that's all. That's all. وَخَلِّلْ بَيْنَ الْأَصَابِعِ, and rinse through the fingers of the hands and the toes also. You rinse between the fingers and the toes also. Why? Because water reaches there with more difficulty. It's more difficult for water to reach the toes, between the toes and in between the fingers, unless you properly rinse them. This is mustahab, it's not wajib. Why? Because we said the wajib is what?
To wash.
Or define wash. What does wash mean? What did we say is a minimum?
Normal wash.
For every part to be touched with water. That's what it means. Okay, that's a wash. Because someone might wash and miss a part of the arm. That's not a wash in the sharia. In wudu, that's not called wash, because you've missed out a part. So once the person is washed, the minimum is to make sure that every part of the body has been touched with water. So this addition is just an extra recommendation so that the water can properly reach between the fingers. If a person has fingers such that the skin is very close to each other, the fingers are really close to each other, between the fingers here or the toes, and water won't reach unless they rinse, in which case rinsing becomes wajib, because now the water won't reach between the toes and between the fingers unless you actually properly rinse and wash. وَبَالِغْ فِي الْإِسْتِنْشَاقِ إِلَّا أَن تَكُونَ صَائِمًا, and exaggerate in istinshaq unless you're fasting. Unless you're fasting. Which means you exaggerate in entering water into the nose and then blowing it out unless you're fasting. And this came up in the book of Siyam. And we said it's a proof that... What's this hadith a proof for when it comes to fasting?
Anything that enters.
Yeah, something that intentionally enters the nose and goes down, it breaks the fast. It breaks the fast. Because he said, unless you're fasting. Which means that this has an effect on the fast. And exaggerating in istinshaq, again, we don't need to keep repeating this, but we will in case it's misunderstood. And we will so that this principle becomes settled in the hearts within reason. Again, a person doesn't harm themselves by entering water into their nose in an aggressive manner or huge amounts of water. None of that is needed. All that's required is entering into the nose just to make sure that there's proper cleaning of the nose and a proper rinsing. وعن عثمان ولأبي داود في رواية إذا توضأت فمضمض. In another narration, if you perform ablution, then rinse your mouth, which we've covered already. وعن عثمان رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يخلل لحيته في الوضوء أخرجه الترمذي وصححه ابن خزيمة. The Prophet ﷺ would run his fingers through the beard. This running of the fingers through the beard can be wajib and it can be mustahab. It's wajib when? When does it become wajib?
When you can see the skin.
When the beard is thin. When the beard is thin, you have a thin beard, it's wajib for you to rinse through the beard. When the beard is thick, rinsing is just mustahab, recommended, and you don't have to. And it's sufficient for you to wash the outer part of the beard, and that's enough. And you don't have to rinse through the fingers in wudu if the beard is thick. What's thick, what's thin?
You can see the skin.
If you see the skin underneath the beard, then it's thin. If you don't see the skin underneath the beard, then it's thick. What if someone has both? The upper part is thick, you can see through, and the lower part you can't see through. Then the upper part is treated like thin, and the lower part is treated like thick. Simple as. Yeah? That's all it is. So this running the fingers through the beard becomes wajib when the beard is thin, you can see through. And it's mustahab when it's thick. Even though there's some niza', and this is the opinion of Ahmad ibn Hanbal based on this hadith, authenticated by Ibn Khuzaymah rahimahullah. وعن عبد الله بن زيد رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أوتي بثلثي مد فجعل يدلك ذراعيه صححه ابن خزيمة وأخرجه أحمد. The Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, as narrated by Abdullah ibn Zayd, was brought 2/3 of a mud of water, and he started to rub his forearms with it. So we have two things here. A mud is what? What's a mud? 2/3 of a mud. A mud is 2 handfuls. Like this amount of water. 2/3 of this. So is that a large amount or small amount? Small amount. And he made wudu with that. He made wudu with that, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Which means that we need less water than we think. We need less water than we think. And if a person tries to use a water bottle, 500 milliliter for example, water bottle like this one, you'll see that it's enough to make wudu. It is enough to make wudu. Because we're so used to opening our fountains at home and making it run and run and run and washing every part of the body with about 3 liters. Because of that, we're not used to making wudu with small amounts of water. So even if a person does use a tap, then keeping the running steady is important, so that it doesn't just waste. And when the Prophet ﷺ was asked about wasting water, he said, even if you're by a runny river, don't waste water, regardless, even if it's huge in amount. Someone might say, what's going to happen if I add an extra liter? It's a tap, it's not going to stop, it's going to continue, it's not a big problem. Regardless, from the adab of a Muslim is to keep it. And from thanking Allah is from the reasons why blessings are kept. And disbelieving in Allah's blessing is why punishment occurs, and people are no longer blessed with water and food and ease, generally speaking. And he was rubbing his forearms, and this is called what in Arabic? You use water and you rub. Huh? Delk. We said it's called delk. Yadliku yaday. Okay, it's called delk. And we said it's wajib or mustahab. Why is it mustahab? Based on our principle of what washing means. Because the minimum is that water touches your skin. If I grab this glass of water and run it down my arm, will water touch my arm and have run down it? Yes. So long as water runs down the arm and it touches each part of the arm, that's your wash done. That's the bare minimum, according to the majority. This dalk here is recommended, it's mustahab, and it's better to always be done. Yeah, this is why it's no good to have the tap open and just stick your arm like that and run it underneath. Same with the foot. You just stick your foot underneath and turn it around and wash it properly with the hand. And also rinse through the fingers, so that's a complete wudu. وعنه i.e. عن عبد الله بن زيد أنه رأى النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يأخذ لأذنيه ماء خلاف الماء الذي أخذه لرأسه. أخرجه البيهقي وقال إسناده صحيح. This hadith explains what we have already mentioned. He says, Abdullah ibn Zayd, I saw the Prophet ﷺ take some water to wipe his ears, other than the water he used to wipe his head. Yeah, so we've already explained this. Wet the hands, wipe the head, and another wetting of the hands to wipe the ears. Wash the ears or wipe the ears? Why? Because they're part of the head. It goes with the head. And Al-Bayhaqi said its isnad is sahih. Al-Bayhaqi is from the Imams of Hadith, of course. All of those scholars mentioned here at the end of the Hadith are all Imams of Hadith. And Al-Bayhaqi is from the major Imams of Hadith. وهو عند مسلم من هذا الوجه بلفظ ومسح برأسه بماء غير فضل يديه وهو المحفوظ. And it's been reported by Muslim through the same chain as Al-Bayhaqi with the wording, he wiped his head with water other than the water remaining from the washing of the hands. This narration is in Sahih Muslim. And so therefore, do we require to ask whether it's authentic or not? No, it doesn't require. It doesn't require because the Ummah has agreed and accepted that what's in Al-Bukhari and Muslim is authentic. And if a scholar or somebody else comes and says, no, a hadith in Al-Bukhari is not authentic. Is this possible? Yes, it's happened. It's happened. Some of them might have said, this hadith in Bukhari, this hadith in Sahih Muslim, I don't consider it authentic. Then the response is, that's your ijtihad. We have Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, Amir al-Mu'mineen al-Hadith. We prefer his ijtihad over yours. Jazakallah khair. And that's the response given by the scholars, not out of disrespect. If a Daraqutni, for example, comes and says, I consider such an hadith not authentic, and it's in Sahih Bukhari, then Daraqutni is from the heavyweights of hadith, not a problem. However, for the general folk, for everyone else, as far as we're concerned, it's authentic. Because Al-Bukhari is prioritized and considered more of an authority than Daraqutni. And same as Muslim ibn Hajjaj, considered more of an authority than Daraqutni, for example. And like we said, the fact that the Ummah has accepted these two books suffices. So anyone who wants to claim otherwise, there's no need to turn towards them. Okay. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول. Abu Hurairah narrates رضي الله عنه. His name is Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr. Abdurrahman ibn Sakhr al-Dawsi رضي الله عنه. قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إن أمتي يأتون يوم القيامة غرا محجلين من أثر الوضوء. My ummah come on the day of judgment with radiant faces, hands and feet from the traces of wudu. فَمَنْ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمْ أَنْ يُطِيلَ غُرَّتَهُ فَلْيَفْعَلْ مُتَّفَقٌ عَلَيْهِ. Agreed upon. My people come on the day of resurrection with radiant faces, hands and feet. Radiant faces, hands and feet, meaning radiant with light, shining. From the traces of wudu, due to wudu. If any of you can extend his brightness, let him do so. If any of you can extend his brightness, let him do so. Now, extending the brightness, according to Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and it's also the opinion of many scholars, if not the majority of scholars, extending the wudu means to add to it. It means to add to it, and this is why it was narrated from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, which might be here mentioned by the author, that he would wash his elbow above he would wash his arm above the elbow. So he would wash his arm and continue above the elbow, based on his understanding of this hadith. Based on his understanding of this hadith. They come on the day of judgment with radiant faces and arms and feet, hands and feet. So he understood it to mean that therefore, if you extend that, you extend your light on the day of judgment. And several scholars have taken this interpretation. Al-Imam Malik ibn Anas and other scholars don't accept this in understanding. And they say radiant means from the wudu itself, perfecting the wudu. So it means you perfect your wudu. All it means is you make the wudu perfect. The washing is perfect. Each part of the body is washed. The wipe is properly done, the whole head. the feet are washed properly, and that's your reward for you on the Day of Judgment, inshaAllah. And as for this addition here, if any of you can extend his brightness, let him do so. Then a lot of the scholars of Hadith say that this addition is not from the Prophet ﷺ. It's the addition of Abu Hurairah, which is called Mudraj, an addition to the Hadith, which is not from the Prophet ﷺ, but sometimes it's added in as part of the Hadith. And some consider it as words of the Prophet ﷺ. Those who say this is from the Prophet ﷺ say therefore, extending the brightness means you add. This is called extending. Sticking it to what's the usual is not extending. And many of them say this is from Abu Hurairah. Just like if I say now, for example, the Prophet ﷺ says actions are by intention. So brothers, you need to make sure that the intentions are pure. This addition, so brothers, you need to make sure your intentions are pure, from me or from the Prophet ﷺ? Leaving the toilet is with the right. Entering the masjid is with the right. Putting shoes on is with the right. Clothing with the right. Again, clothing also. Or socks also, you begin with the right, then the left. A jacket similarly, anything which has two sides, you begin with the right, then left. And then you begin with the right and then the left. And one of the scholars who reached very old age, maybe around 90, for a long time was really upset and saddened when they found out why he was upset and saddened. He said, when I left the masjid, I put on my left shoe first, then the right shoe. And he was so saddened about that, because he put the left shoe on before the right. That's how strict and specific they wanted to be with following every single sunnah. Every single sunnah, without belittling any of it. If we saw somebody who was upset because of that, subhanAllah, you're upset because of this? We miss Fajr and we're not upset. And you're upset because you haven't put your this one for who's better, me or you, the one doing it? He's better than us, of course. It's not something to criticize. He should criticize us. For every single sunnah is not to be belittled. And that's what shows the sign of Iman. That's a true sign of Iman, that someone follows every single bit, every single detail. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا توضأتم فابدأوا بميامنكم. Simple, clear hadith. When you perform ablution, begin with your right hand. Begin with the right. Begin with the right limbs. Sorry, not the right hand. Begin with the right limbs, just as we said now. وعن المغيرة بن شعبة رضي الله عنه أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم توضأ فمسح بناصيته وعلى العمامة والخفين. أخرجه مسلم. Al-Mughira narrates that the Prophet ﷺ performed wudu, then passed over his wet hands on his forelock, the top part of his head, the front of his head, and his turban, and over the leather socks. Over the turban and over the forehead, then the turban, and he wiped over his leather socks. Wiping the leather socks is allowed, like we said, according to the consensus of the scholars, ijma' of the Muslims. And in fact, some of the scholars put this in the books of which science? Not fiqh. Fiqh is obvious. Why? Because it's part of wudu and so on. But they stick in the books of aqidah. As al-Tahawi rahimahullah says, وَنَرَى الْمَسْحَ عَلَى الْخُفَّيْنِ. And we see wiping over the leather socks. I.e., we are of the opinion that we wipe over the leather socks. Why? What's this got to do with aqidah? Aqidah is belief in Allah, belief in the Prophet ﷺ, belief in the angels, Jannah, Nar, Iman. What wiping over the leather socks got to do with? From all of these types of things of fiqh, this is what he puts in there. Why? Is there nothing more special than wiping over the leather socks? At least he could have said, and we are of the opinion of wiping of the face in wudu, washing the feet, no, wiping the socks. Why? Because the Shia say you don't wipe on the socks. That's why. Okay, because some of the groups, whose opinion doesn't count, of course, anyway, but since they are of the opinion that a person doesn't wipe over the leather socks, they put it in the books of Aqidah because it's become a sign for Ahl Sunnah. That's why he's put this specific thing. Otherwise, it's not for the books of Aqidah, it's for the books of fiqh. But for this reason, he puts it in there. Wiping over the turban Of course, now a person can do as the Prophet ﷺ did here and wipe over the front part of the head and wipe the turban. However, not every head covering can be wiped over, according to the 4 Imams. Many companions like Jabir ibn Abdullah, as Malik narrates in his Muwatta, and other companions say wiping over the turban, just the turban like that, isn't allowed. And that's the opinion of most of the scholars. So for example, now most of us wear the topis or these head coverings. Can a person wipe over that? The answer is no. The answer is no. The type of turban that a person can wipe, according to Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, because he's the only one that says you can wipe over the turban, the rest say you can't, is the turban that runs underneath the chin. So a person has a turban and it comes underneath, as what they wear in North Africa, in Algeria and Morocco, and in parts of the Sahara in Africa. This is the way the turban is worn. Or the second way is the turban is done and it's the tail, it has a tail that is flicked from behind. Yeah, as some of the Indian, as what we see in a lot of the Indian, from the Indian people and Pakistani people, the turban is worn like that, with the tail flicked back. And these two are the types of turbans that can be wiped over according to Ahmed. Why? He says because these are the only turbans that were worn in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So that's what's allowed to wipe over. You can't just wipe over anything. A person has a cap, for example, thinks they can wipe over the cap, or a snow hat or something like that, and you wipe. The only turban that can be wiped over is this. Same as this turban is the woman's headscarf. She wipes over it in cases of need, preferably, to be on the safe side. Cases of need, not at home, you wipe over the headscarf. The headscarf, like we said, also with the condition that it's a fully done up headscarf, because that's the headscarf that is difficult to remove and get rid of and so on. As for if someone's just flicked the headscarf over the top and they want to wipe over, what's the point in that? Remove the headscarf and wipe over the head. Okay. If, however, a woman, for example, is outside in a place, in a public toilet, or a place where she can't make wudu in front of people, she can't get rid of her headscarf, in which case you say wipe over the head, on the condition that the headscarf was put on when you had wudu. Why? Qiyas of the socks. And okay, what do we have remaining? طيب وعنهما في صفة الحج وعن جابر رضي الله عنهما في صفة الحج. Jabir رضي الله عنه has a long hadith in which he explains the acts of Hajj of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. قال صلى الله عليه وسلم ابدأوا بما بدأ الله به. Begin with what Allah has begun with. Begin with what Allah has begun with. Reported by An-Nasa'i. What does this mean? Begin with what Allah has begun with. What did Allah begin with? Huh? Verse of wudu. Begin with what Allah began with, i.e., just like Allah began with washing the face in the verse. فاغسلوا يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا قمتم إلى الصلاة فاغسلوا وجوهكم وأيديكم إلى المرافق وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين. These things, these 4 verses in order, as mentioned in the verse, commands here the Prophet ﷺ to wash them, to wash in order, in that order. And this order, like we said, is wajib. Is wajib according to Imam Ahmad rahimahullah and other scholars, many scholars. وعنه قال كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا توضأ أدار الماء على مرفقيه. أخرجه الدارقطني بإسناد ضعيف. الدارقطني narrates his hadith with a weak chain of narrators. The Prophet ﷺ used to run the water down his elbows while performing ablution. أدار الماء على مرفقيه. He used to run the water down his elbows while performing wudu. That means he would make wudu, wash the arm, and he would run down the elbow. And Al-Hafiz says here with a weak chain of narrators. So why does he mention it then, if it's a weak hadith? Can a person act upon a weak hadith? There are two types of acting. There's one acting upon what the scholars call fada'il al-a'mal, actions which are sort of additional recommended acts of worship, such as dhikr, types of recitation of the Quran, and so on, that kind of thing. And the scholars allow that you rely on a hadith or narrate a hadith, even if it is weak, in this regard. And this is the opinion of the vast majority of scholars. For example, Salat al-Duha, is this an authentic sunnah or not? Authentic sunnah. Let's say a hadith comes and says the one who prays Salat al-Duha has XYZ reward. This is called Fada'il al-A'mal. Okay, it mentions a reward or mentions an addition to a sunnah that's already known, authentic. Yeah? Not anything that's weak, that seems like an act of worship can be done. Yeah? Not anything that's weak that seems like an act of worship can be done. And this is a mistake that is made. Fada'il al-A'mal does not mean any act of worship. Anything that's like an act of worship, like Salat al-Tasbih and other things like that, just because it's weak, it doesn't matter, we can still use it. That, we're talking here about the reward, or in addition to what's already authentic, that kind of thing. That kind of thing. As for ahkam, halal, haram, the weak ahadith can't be relied upon. As is very clear with the Salaf. This is why it's narrated from many of the scholars of hadith from the past. And whenever I sort of mention the scholars of hadith of the past, then the reference is who? Yahya ibn Ma'in, Ali ibn al-Madini, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Malik ibn Anas, Sufyan al-Thawri, Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, the imams of that time, the big imams of that time, they would say, when it came to Fada'il al-A'mal, we would be softer on the hadith. Even if it's not quite fully authentic, not a problem. But when it came to the halal and the haram, we were strict. Made sure it was authentic. Now this is Fada'il al-A'mal or Ahkam? Ahkam. But it's weak. So why did he mention it? Because the Al-Hafidh, rahimahullah, mentions the ahadith that the scholars relied upon in Ahkam. Maybe some scholars consider it authentic. Or maybe they consider it weak, but there are other ahadith that suggest that it's authentic or has some kind of place in terms of authenticity. And therefore it's mentioned. Also, some ahadith can be weak, but the scholars act upon them. Still. Have we not come across this? Which hadith did we come across this? The third hadith of this book. What was it? And we said the scholars agree that this meaning is correct. The hadith was weak, but the meaning of the hadith is authentic, and you have to act upon it. By the consensus of the scholars. Who remembers the third hadith of this book? Al-ma'u tahurun illa in taghayyara lawnuhu aw ta'muhu aw rihuhu. Water is pure unless it's changed its taste or color or smell. We said the hadith wasn't authentic, but we said the scholars agree that its meaning is authentic, its meaning is valid. Yeah? So not the moment a person hears a weak hadith, a'udhu billah, not a problem. Weak hadith can be used by some of the scholars. Weak hadith are different, or weaknesses are different. Some ahadith are weak according to some, authentic according to others. Some ahadith are lies, complete lies, and both are considered weak. Are they treated the same way? Not treated the same way. This final hadith, we will end with this, inshaAllah. عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا وضوء لمن لم يذكر اسم الله عليه. أخرجه أحمد وأبو داود وابن ماجه بإسناد ضعيف. There is no wudu for the one who doesn't mention Allah's name upon it. Mentioned by Abu Dawood and Ahmad and Ibn Majah with a weak chain of narrators. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah says لا يثبت فيه شيء. Nothing on this issue is authentic. Meaning, there is nothing authentic which suggests that saying Bismillah at the beginning of wudu is wajib. Yeah? Nothing authentic is narrated in this regard. Even though Ahmad ibn Hanbal, in the mashhur of his madhab, says saying Bismillah at the beginning of wudu is wajib. Which means if the person leaves it, intentionally, his wudu becomes invalid. However, Al-Muwaffaq ibn Qudama and Sheikh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah and many scholars of the Hanbali madhab afterwards consider it sunnah, as is the opinion of Abu Hanifa and the opinion of Malik and the opinion of Shafi'i and the opinion of the vast majority of Imams, saying Bismillah at the beginning of the wudu is a sunnah and it's not wajib. And this hadith is? What about this hadith? We said it's weak. We said the Huffaz considered it a weak hadith. Ahmad himself, rahimahullah, one of the teachers of Al-Bukhari, says the hadith is weak. So saying Bismillah at the beginning of wudu is a sunnah, that is mustahab, and it's not wajib, so therefore the wudu is valid even without it, and we'll leave it at that, because Isha is at 9:30, isn't it? Yeah? Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.